Hello, my friends. Welcome to Living the Liminal this week. It's just so wonderful to have you all here. So you have a treat today because I have yet to really have anybody on twice, but this sweetheart of a person that we have on today as a guest has agreed to come on and be a guest again because we kind of flubbed up the first time. Sometimes there's really some good stuff that comes out of failures and flub ups, I call them. Like really where things went wrong. But the last time we had my guest on, we had some technology issues. My microphone was going out and I didn't know it. So we ended up, if you want to hear our first conversation, we did put it up on the platform, but it's not like all pretty and all that. So it's just up there because we felt like it was needed. It was a good conversation. But this time we're going to have all the formality of it. And we've got microphones that work this time, new products, and we're all ready to go. And I'm so excited to introduce you to Dr. Lynyetta Willis. I've come to love her dearly. I feel like we just had this conversation a few minutes ago and finally we were like, hello, we need to start recording this. So, we've already had our conversation and now we're going to have a conversation with you all. But she is a psychologist and a family empowerment coach. She works with families who, they just maybe have unhealthy patterns. They're struggling. There's cross-generational cycles going on. And one thing I learned from her the last conversation is this concept of harmony. So I really want to dig into that with her. She's also an author, and I'm going to let her tell you because it kind of flows into her story. So Dr. Willis, oh my gosh, welcome back today.
I'm so excited to be here, Christy. I'm secretly not super sad that the first one flubbed up because now it gives me an opportunity to hang out with you again. So there's that.
Well, and it was both conversations, I'm getting chills, right? Because the world needs the conversation we're having again today. I just know it because we're both in a different kind of place than we were a few months ago. But family is where it starts. That's where everything starts. Let's just get real. There's a possibility that, we come into this lifetime with some stuff from the past. We all know that that's a possibility. It probably does linger in our souls and our soul contracts and past lives and all of that. But the reality is the environment we're living in now, the consciousness that we're living in now, the awareness we're living in now, family is where it starts and family is where it breaks apart. So let's just be real, right? So I'm going to start you back to, because I want everyone to understand where you're coming from. But you have a lot of experience in the world of family coming together, family falling apart, family learning experience that brought you to where you are today. So share a little bit of that background for us so that our audience kind of knows, here's where we're coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. Personal and a lot of personal and professional experience as a field for over 20 years in the field of psychology, but I've been in the field of life and family since I was in the womb,
Yeah.
And so my backstory is my parents were married, had me. They got divorced when I was a year old. My father went away and I would say he forgot to come back. And I was that child that grew up sitting at the door with her backpack, waiting for dad to come pick her up on the weekends, And so that had an impact on how I was and who I was. I was raised by some amazing, phenomenal women and men. My grandfather, I always referred to him as my best friend growing up. And the experiences, there were certain things that happened in my family, certain beliefs and ways of being that just didn't work. As I grew up and I looked back on them, I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to really integrate that. Just basic beliefs that many of the listeners might understand and resonate with, children should be seen and not heard, spare the rod, spoil the child, all of these old fashioned phrases that have been carried on for generation to generation. And I decided, like, I'm going to stop a lot of these cycles that just don't work anymore. And, you know, like I said last time, like, this isn't about shaming my family. I love my family. My grandmother was the light of my life in many ways. You know, my mother and I, we just talked yesterday. I mean, you know, so these are really phenomenal, strong women. And they pass down habits and patterns that I just think don't work anymore. And I don't want to pass on to my kids. So I was gung-ho about that. I started working with families and parents as when I was in graduate school. And when I graduated, I had a private practice. And by the time I had kids, I was like, oh, I got this parenting thing down. I've been helping parents all these years. This is easy, whatever. And then I had kids. And I was like, this ain't easy. So much easier than somebody else's kid.
It is. And you feel like, because I was a teacher for, I couldn't even tell you how many years before I became a parent. So I just thought, well, I have this background, right, in teaching and development and kids and this understanding. And I did very well in the classroom. I mean, I was like a rock star in a way. And then the kids came along, and you know, when they're little, you don't notice it as much because you're just freaking tired. And then, like, as they get older, you're like, ooh, okay, that really lit up a fire in me. And oh my God, that really charged me up. And what is this about? Why am I really mad at you right now? And you're this little bitty being, you know, you just happen to write on the wall, and I'm flipping out over here. So
yes.
Yeah.
Starts to bring up, and a lot of times when we get triggered in those ways, right? And the trigger is when our child, somebody in our life does something. It's the behavior, and it brings up, or it awakens within us old patterns and habits from the past, right? And so I would find that when I would really get triggered, I would be pulled towards the thoughts and the behaviors that were used on me growing up. And I realized, like, this isn't okay. Like I said, I wasn't going to do this. And here I am in situations where I'm yelling, you know, and all this stuff. So I made the choice. I said, okay, I'm going to have to really start putting into practice what I've been teaching all these years and what I've learned all these years. And I started to really just sit down and think about what are the core ingredients that have really led to the transformation that many of my clients, because I specialized in trauma, that many of my clients made in their lives. What were like the core ingredients, those things that really brought them to that next level of transformation? And I realized they were 5 paths, I like to call them, or 5 steps that really contributed to the growth and the evolution of individuals and subsequently their families and their relationships. So,
and, you know, like this whole concept of generational influence, I mean, it's huge. It's huge in any relationship that we're having, right? Because we know that relationships are there to really teach us. They're there to inform us, to teach us, to evolve us. That's where the magic happens, is in any relationship. But the husband, wife, or let's say mom, dad relationship, and then the parent-child relationship, that seems to be where the generational influence happens more often, or we feel it more. Why is that?
Safety and familiarity. So one of the phrases that I use a lot is stable misery. And it's that place that we often find ourselves in many times in our most sacred relationships where there's nothing technically wrong. You know, it's not like the house is burning down or anything like that. And we're unfulfilled, we're unhappy, right? And so we just continue in these cycles. And what tends to happen, because I work with couples and I work with parents, what I notice in both of those relationship dynamics is we start to fall into patterns and habits that become predictable. And we enjoy predictability. Like from an evolutionary standpoint, we will choose familiar and predictable over unknown and unsure every single time, even if unknown and unsure could actually bring us to a more harmonious or a more joyous place in our lives. We're going to stick with what's familiar. And when it's not that people outside of our families don't trigger us, they trigger us. But we're not sure what the result is going to be if we go off on them, or we interact with like we interact at home with the people that we care about. We've got them. We understand the pattern. So in many ways, especially with children, I tell parents this all the time. And I'm like, I know this doesn't sound fun, but the fact that your child tends to melt down with you the most is actually a testament to what a great parent you are, because they feel safe enough to do that with you. They know that if I break down with my mom or my dad, that my life isn't going to end or crazy things aren't going to happen. Same thing with partners. It's like we start to come up with these ideas in our heads, and we make assumptions about what the other person's thinking, what the other person's feeling, what the other person's doing. And that leads us to automatically, instantaneously respond or react as if that is the core truth. And we don't take a moment to question that. And the reason we do that is because of patterns, and we get so familiar that we don't take alternate information that could potentially lead us to shift that pattern or that dynamic.
You're making me think like, there's so many definitions for trauma, right? And our typical understanding of trauma is it's got to be something big, like really monumental. But over the last 5-10 years, even, we've come to understand trauma can just be something small, right? So something that really you would maybe go, oh, that's not really that big of a deal the first time. Mm-hmm. But the fact that it continually over and over and over. So as you're talking about like a continuous pattern, it's making me think that sometimes we need to enlarge our definition of trauma to include those maybe behaviors that maybe the first time, and okay, I'll even give it the second time, weren't that big of a deal. But the fact that they happened because the other person was just in that habitual pattern of behaving, they just kept going. And then the child intercepts it all the time. And that's long-term sustainability creates the trauma in the child. I mean, is that kind of like your understanding, or am I simplifying it too much?
No, not at all. A lot of times. So I talk about dramas and traumas, right? And one of the examples that I give is, so I'm a descendant of slaves. And way back when in slavery, they would whip and beat slaves.
Yeah.
That's how slaves were kept in line. And in many ways, in many twisted cases, it was seen as a form of love and attention and doing this because, I love you and I want to keep you safe. And you don't know what's in your best interest. So I have to do this.
And I want you to be the best you can be, and that's not it. So you got to learn. Yeah.
So that mindset and that methodology was used by slave masters, and it was passed down into the lineage of the slaves. So now when I grow up, I get whippings and beatings, just like was done many, many, many years ago, during slavery. Now, my family, if you ask them, they weren't doing it because, oh, we're doing this because, she is inhuman and needs to be treated like chattel, which was the thought process back then. But it was more this sense that doing this because we love her, and this is what we have to do to keep her in line, and all of these different things. So I've never experienced the trauma of slavery. I wasn't here in this life with this body and, in this manifestation. But the drama, meaning the behaviors and the patterns, like if you literally think of it like a drama on a stage, how it plays out is continue to play out generation after generation after generation. And that drama is reflected in how we show up in our families. So sometimes somebody might think, well, this, XYZ, it happened generations ago, but I don't really feel like it's traumatized me. And I'll say, okay, maybe it hasn't, but you're still playing out the drama of this trauma that occurred, God knows how many years ago. And as we continue to do that, we continue to pass that down to our kids who pass it down to their kids. Now, there are absolutely cases where the dramas can be traumatizing for sure, 100%. And then we end up continuing to pass that down to our kids. But the biggest issue isn't so much, I mean, the trauma is bad, don't get me wrong. And the piece of it that is really harmful is the lack of skills and resources taught to the child to deal with it. One of the definitions of trauma, it's when our experiences or the weight or the burden that's put on us, when it outweighs the resources we have to be able to deal with it. So when that experience outweighs the resources that we have to be able to deal with it in a significant way, we are often left with trauma. And so when a child goes through habitual patterns of extreme stress and unpredictability and all of these different things, and they don't have the resources to cope with it, it can be a trauma for them, right? Because especially if
that makes so much sense, because how many of us when we were younger had things happening where you weren't able to process it out because no one around you. I know in my own upbringing, I used to, early on, I said, no one told us it wasn't us. So my dad walks out and leaves, and we're left with this mess, and no one ever from any relative, any friend ever looked at the kids and said, it's not you. So when you're processing and there's no resource around to say, it's not you, sweetheart, this is what's happening. This is what's going on. So then you don't take it on. Otherwise you take on whatever way you looked at it, you take it on as yours to carry.
100%. And kids are very good at that. Children are very good at internalizing everything around them. It's my fault. And that's where those core beliefs come from that we grow up with. I'm not enough. I'm worthless. I'm bad. I'm wrong. All those core beliefs started when we were littles, you know.
Yeah.
And that's why when I work with parents, I have a parenting coaching program that I do called Triggered to Transformed. And we start with you, the parent, right? Like we start with what's going on with you and helping the parent to gain a deeper understanding of where their resources might fall short and where things going on within them, how it's impacting how they're showing up in the parenting. I think most parenting programs start with, okay, let's talk about things you can do to shift your child and all this stuff. And I'm like, no, you need to start. You can't do anything with that if your nervous system is completely dysregulated and you don't have the skills and the resources in the moment when you need them most to be able to deal with what's going on with your child.
Especially if you're, like you said, you call it drama, and like I might call it the energetic intention of what has happened in the past. If you're still carrying that, then when you go to do anything different, okay, like let's use timeout, right? Because that's a universal, like you're taught that early on. Well, some parents use timeout, very authoritative. I mean, I can't even say that word right now. My mouth is like authoritative. Okay, with authority. We're going to revise the whole conversation with authority. Okay. Sometimes you just can't say stuff, but some parents are using timeout with so much authority because they're carrying the energetic weight or intention from what, like you said, that generational piece coming in, where if you don't clear that out and get very open and free about how you're doing it, why you're doing it, and create your value system, then you're going to do that. Otherwise, other parents are using timeout in a very loving and soft, and we're just going to use it so we both can kind of come down off the magnitude of this moment, and then we can work through the messiness and the entanglement process. Don't you think isn't that what you're kind of talking about?
For sure. And now, the parenting field has evolved to not even really use that as, I was raised in the field, quote unquote, with behaviorism, right? So teaching parents timeouts and all that stuff is where
it never really worked for me because they snuck off, or when I had my twins, I tried using the stupid timeout. I'm going to say it's stupid today because I would put them in timeout and those little suckers would crawl and find each other. And I'm like, this is not working for the twin factor because one's crying and the other one's mad. and I'm trying to put them in both timeouts so we can have a calm down time before I work through, because their emotions are so heightened. And yeah, those little suckers would find each other. I'm like, I remember telling the parents, this teacher lady, I don't think this works for twins, or at least it's not working for me. So I must be doing something wrong with it, because like they just would get out of their seat and they'd crawl, and then they'd find each other laying there just laughing. I'm like, well, I'm kind of mad about what you just did. And now I'm even more like in a, unknown place.
That is so funny. And the way that you described it is actually how, it's often taught now. It's how I teach it. And we call it time in, right? Yeah. So it's more that sense of, let's take a moment to, if we take it from a neurobiological perspective, to calm our nervous systems, right? So it's not so much you have to sit in the naughty chair for 4 minutes or however old you are. Like, it's not about that. It's what does your system need right now to be able to get that frontal lobe back online, to be able to regulate, to be able to calm. And sometimes it's, sitting in a corner in their room and reading a book. Sometimes it's sitting next to mom or dad in the couch. Sometimes it's, right? Like, I ask my children, like, what do you feel like you need when you get into those moments? Because it's not about me punishing you. I want you to understand that you have resources that you can access. Yeah. And you're not gonna, when you're 30 years old and you're having a meltdown, because we have meltdowns even as adults, you're not gonna put yourself in a room by yourself, in a corner, in a chair, and face a wall. That's just not gonna be your approach to dealing.
I do want to put myself in a room by myself. I mean, come on, let's get real about that. I do want to do that. I don't want to sit in a chair facing the corner, but I would like to be like, hey, I'm having a little moment. I'm going and locking myself in my bedroom for the next 25 hours.
Snuggling up in my bed, flipping through Netflix, like that. That sounds amazing.
You can bring me some tea later, and do you think you can bring me dinner? Because I'm really having a moment.
Exactly. So using that to teach them how to regulate themselves. But in order to do that, guess what we got to do first? We got to regulate ourselves.
Yeah. So like, is that, okay, let's just be honest. I mean, the role of parenting, okay, it can be the best and the worst, right? So we can go on and on about the best. I mean, there's so many good stuff. I mean, it's fun. It's hilarious. It's just swells your heart up, and it's so incredible. But like, it can be just downright the worst role of your lifetime.
It can.
How can we, I mean, I think there are parents who are carrying this generational piece with them, but then there are just other parents that they just don't even know what to do. I mean, if you have a strong kid and you're not maybe as strong in personality, if you have an emotional child and you're not that highly sensitive or empathic, and that contrast can really rock you. How, I mean, like, what do you do with parents like that come to you?
Yeah, well, that's where the Empowered Path framework comes in, right? And it's 5 paths that I help parents to explore and walk and integrate into their lives so that they can shift how they're showing up with their kids, right? Yeah. And really get to a point where maybe they'll even enjoy parenting and pass on the best parts of themselves, as opposed to those parts that they're afraid will make their kid not want to come home for Christmas break when they're older, right? Like that's the fear, right? And so the 5 paths, like I said earlier, they're areas where I realized, like, oh, when my clients really start shifting these areas, they notice changes within themselves and subsequently within their marriages, within their relationships with their kids. Excuse me. And PATS is actually an acronym. Excuse me. And the P stands for perspective.
Okay.
The number one thing that I consistently see with a lot of my patients that gets them still like I'm in private practice with a lot of my clients, is that the story in their head will 100% lead the body. Like wherever the head goes, the body will naturally follow. Like if you grab me by my head and you drag me to the left, my body's going to the left, right? That's just going to happen. And it's the same thing. The story in your head about the moment, about yourself, or about the other person, your child or your partner, let's say, is going to absolutely 100% influence how you treat them, how you react or respond to them. So a lot of times when we are in fight or flight mode or really agitated modes, the stories usually aren't good. They're stories that, I shouldn't say aren't good. They're not helpful. I like using helpful versus good or bad, but they're not helpful. So they might be things like, my kid is doing this just to make me mad. You know, like that's
they say that a lot.
Story. And there's other options that could possibly be calling for this, you know, or same thing with partner. My partner just wants to make me mad or send me over the edge, right? Like, unless you're married or involved with a sociopath, there's a good chance that there might be some alternate reasons as to why you all are stuck in this pattern, right? So I always talk to people about getting clear about the story in your head. So whenever I have a couple, let's say, and they're going on and on and on and on, and I'll hear like 15 assumptions, like one thing, and I'll stop them and I'll say, tell me what the story in your head is. Like, when you think back to that instance, tell me what is the story in your head about him or about her or about them in that moment.
Yeah.
It's usually something that's unhelpful, right? And so it's like, it's not that we need to get rid of the stories, but check them out, right? Like, and I'll say, like, my clients get really used to saying, the story in my head is, right? That's something.
Yeah, and getting curious about if that story is truthful or if it's an illusion that you've created to make sense of something because you didn't have the resources at the moment.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And, you know, I like to talk about different parts of us, right? There's this called parts work. And I like to talk about the different parts of us that come up. And a lot of the parts that come up during those times have a very narrow perspective. So they got like 3 stories. Like, what they got. It's either A, B, or C. It's nothing else, right? So realizing when we are in those triggered spaces, there are going to be probably very narrow-minded or narrow perspective parts of you that are going to be activated. And just having compassion for that and an awareness of that is really important. Which brings me to the A, which is awareness. Awareness is something that I know growing up, I was taught not to have, you know, like, feelings were bad. They were not good, right? Like, the good feelings were good, but the crying and the, you know, it was hush your fussing, stop crying before I give you something to cry about, right? So they were good feelings and they were bad feelings.
Yeah.
So many of us that do want to change how we raise our kids differently from how we were raised have to relearn or have to re-engage our feelings in a helpful way, and realize that our feelings are actually very helpful entities, right? That when engaged in a helpful way can actually lead us or slow us down and lead us in a more preferred direction. When we think about feelings as bad things, like, or things that we have to lock in a basement somewhere, you know, I had an old professor that would often say, nothing likes being buried alive, and that includes feelings. You know, so it's like
we were just a society that would let each other feel, and not add to the feeling shame, but like honor the feelings. Then we wouldn't get to that shameful, guilty, overzealous place of those toxic thoughts that we begin to kind of take on as, this is who I am. And which is simply not true.
No, and it also would keep us from expressing those thoughts in ways that might feel safer, but actually can be more harmful to our relationships. For instance, I've worked with clients where anger is a comfortable emotion. Sadness is not. Right. So one of the partners will actually be sad and hurt, but it comes out as anger.
Yes.
And it's one of those things where it's like, and then when we start to like poke the sadness a little bit, it's like, oh, what is that? I don't know what that is. Get it away. It's horrible. It's bad. But when they really allow themselves to sink into it, it's like there are all these little kids from the inside that come out and are like, finally. We've been.
And I think when you finally allow yourself to just let the emotions surface, it only takes one time.
Yeah.
Because then the next time it surfaces, you have that memory recall to say, oh, I've been here before. This is just that little bit of sadness that's going to come out because of whatever. And then you honor it. And
Yes.
then that is healing and transformative in and of itself.
100%. And the other piece of awareness too is it's awareness of ourselves, awareness of how we show up in terms of what's going on with our emotions and body sensations, and also awareness of other. Because when we get into these dysregulated places, it's really hard to pay attention to what someone else is doing or the impact we're having on the other person. Right. So when you talk about shifting these patterns, starting to notice, when I do this, what's the results of that, right? And this isn't something that most people can do in the moment. If your brain is offline and you're not going to stop and be like, I just yelled, how is my partner or my child responding? No. This is more of a reflective thing, right? And the more you become aware of that, then the more you can literally start. What we do in Triggered to Transformed is we actually focus on rewiring our brain and rewiring our nervous system so that we're better able to access, we're better able to shift in and out of those states much easier, where we're not stuck there for as long, which is important. It's not that we shouldn't ever be mad. Like I'll have people come to me and I'll say, what do you want? And they're like, I don't ever want to be mad at my kid, or I don't want to yell at my kid, or I don't want to. And I'm like, okay, unless you plan to take up a substance, which I don't agree, like alcohol or drugs, I really don't think that's possible. Like, you're a human being with varied emotions. The idea is not to get rid of them or never be mad or never be triggered. Like, it's going to happen, but it's when that happens, can you regulate? Can you shift? Can you be aware to be able to shift yourself out of that state that's keeping you bound?
Well, and don't you think it's also about building up a resistance to taking that emotion and throwing it, and I'm going to say the word throwing, but projecting it out onto someone else versus holding it as sacred? Hey, I'm just feeling some anger right now. I'll be fine. I'm going to go off here. I'm going to let this anger just swell up in me and come right out of me. Versus so often we'll be like, well, I'm feeling it finally, but what you're doing is you're sort of like vomiting it all over on everybody else, which again changes the trajectory of the relationship again.
Right. Like, we don't want that either. And in the field, we call that the difference between speaking for a feeling versus speaking from a feeling.
Yeah.
Right. So if I speak for, like, and I'll say that, and this is how we teach our children. This is how we start to transform those patterns. So I'll say to my children, because by about 6, 7 o'clock, mama's done. I can't with you all anymore. I'm done. So my patience is shorter. I'm less compassionate.
Your oldest?
Huh?
How old is your oldest?
13.
Oh, Lord, honey, let me tell you, give a couple more years and they come to you now and they want to give you their paper to edit at 10 o'clock at night. I'm like, no. Is not going to happen in this lifetime. So I have to establish the boundary that you do not bring me homework to edit or to look over or a paper to sign after like 8 o'clock. And they look at me like I am some crazy thing that exists. And I'm like, I said, I will do it in the morning. And they're like, no, it's got to be done tonight. And I go, no, see, after 8 o'clock, I don't use that form of my brain anymore to like do schoolwork.
Anything. You might get a worse grade than you would have gotten if you had just turned it in the way it was.
Oh my God. I'm telling you, like, yeah. So you have to like understand all this. That is hilarious. So what's the T in P.A.T.H?
Yeah. So one last thing I was going to say about that is, I will say to my children in that moment, mommy's getting really frustrated or agitated. So I'm going to need to go and sit in the room for right now, because I've said this thing 5 times already and I can't say it anymore. It's just, I can feel myself getting agitated. And that comes from being able to be aware of the story in my head, like these kids are nuts right now, and being aware of my feelings and my body sensations, and then being able to speak for them in a fluid way. And then they know I'm not yelling, I'm not blowing up, I'm just saying it. So then I'm able to go off, and that teaches them to say, I'm feeling frustrated right now, right? You don't have to sit down and do a whole dissertation with them. You just got to model it. So the T, perfect segue, stands for tools. So the shifts in knowledge and insight and deep awareness that you want. But if you use the same tools that you've always used, that's going to happen. None of that's going to shift anything, right?
Right.
Where people start when they try to shift these habits and patterns. They're like, give me tools, and they read books and they go to workshops and But then here is, but when I need it, I can't remember it. That's because you haven't done the stuff up front to help you regulate your system and get clear on, what's going on within you. But once we do that upfront work, now we can mindfully and consciously start to shift the tools we use, like being able to say, I'm really frustrated right now, right? Or being able to exercise time ins, or being able to sit down with your partner and have regular discussions about what's going on so that things don't build up and explode, at the end of the week. You would be floored at how many partners, when we really start to kind of map out when these different explosions happen, they kind of tend to happen around the same times of the week. And what they realize is like, oh, all these little things happen that built up that I didn't talk about. And then I wonder why we just explode at this point,
Right.
So you got to change those tools, and you got to change the tools that you're using and start to shift those. And then the H stands for healing. Once you start to get a taste for what it feels like to shift patterns, that's when you can start to look back and get a little bit of a distance from all the triggered reactions, because you're starting to respond differently. And now you can start asking yourself, okay, what within me needs to be healed? What within me needs to be honored? Like maybe I need to heal that thing that happened to me 20 years ago when I was, a kid, or maybe I need to just honor the fact that after 7:00, my brain's done and I'm not mommying anymore. Or at least I'm mommying. It's like a skeleton crew, up in the main room.
Because I feel like a lot of parents did not come into this role understanding some of those fundamental tools, I like your word tools, that we need to take care of us.
Mm-hmm.
So, the airplane thing, we got to put the oxygen mask. We're not taught how to put the oxygen mask on all the time, right?
We can't even find the oxygen mask. We're like, what's an oxygen? Where is it? I don't know.
So you go into it. I mean, think about it. Before you have your baby, you're running around and you have this freedom. And then all of a sudden it's like overnight, boom, you've got this thing, right? And it's crying and it needs you for everything, because it can't talk, it can't walk. And you just all of a sudden you're creating a role, and what are you using? Whatever So, I mean, yeah, you were a psychologist. I was a teacher. Maybe we had a little more background in that, but it's whatever and then it's your past experience. And then it's, if you're tuned into your intuition or your instinct, you might add that in there. But that's not a real foundational match for doing what's best for me and doing what's best for my child. And I feel like when you use that word and both parties are winning, you get so much farther versus take a look at what just happened. And did both of you win there? Or is somebody coming up a little bit short there?
Yeah, it's like, what is that word? I'm going to butcher it. It's like Pyrrhic victory or something like that. I remember from school where it's like, there's a war and nobody really wins. It's like both sides lose, it's that type of victory, which I need to look up how to pronounce it. But 100%, it's one of those things where the more we start to shift the tools, the more we start to heal our stuff, then the more we will, which brings us to the S, which is self-empowerment. The more we'll be able to empower not just ourselves, but our relationships, our children, our partners, to be able to engage one another in helpful ways. Because what ends up happening, we get stuck in these patterns, and I hear this from parents all the time. It's like, I feel like my child needs to almost like play a role with me, or there's a fear that they have of can't say this, can't do that, right? But I want my child to feel like they can come to me. I want my child to trust me, right? So a lot of that involves you feeling self-empowered, like we all have needs. We can get those needs met. We can take steps forward, realizing that any situation you're in, you have power. There's power in there. Like it might only be to pee. I mean, we have power in any situation to be able to, that we can use in any situation. So a lot of times it's when we feel overwhelmed or frustrated, asking ourselves, where is my power in this moment? And sometimes it might be walking away. Sometimes it might be asking a favor from someone. Sometimes, there's so many different things that we can do that we're often not taught to do because, it just doesn't come up in our mind as an option. But when we start to settle into the realm of self-empowerment, then there's a lot of different resources and ideas that begin to bubble to the surface around ways that we can take care of ourselves, around ways that we can honor those that we truly care about without giving up who we are in that process.
Yeah, I really have come to learn that it's so important not to be in a relationship if you have to in the slightest way give up something about yourself, or if you're asking your child to give up something about their selves so that you feel comfortable. Like anytime we have to do that betrayal dance or the abandonment dance, that's a relationship that needs a lot of work.
Yeah, it's so true. And as parents, I think, it's interesting in the parenting field now, what I'm seeing a lot of is the pendulum is swinging away from the, punitive approach, which is great. But like pendulums, because this is the way physics works, when it's to one side, it's got to swing all the way over to
there. Yeah.
Start, calming down and finding its middle. So now what a lot of parents that come to me have been reprogrammed with is this idea that my needs don't matter. Now, nobody says that literally, but it's this almost subconscious, you've just got to give up everything for your kids. Your kids all their needs are important and versus yours. It's so funny. I was in the car with my daughter just yesterday. We were coming home from school and she asked me if she could use my phone to listen to music. And I was like, no, baby, I have to listen to, like, one of my friends left me a message and I'm like, I'm just going to play this message. And she said, Mommy, that's not right, because what did she say to me? You are not giving up you're not doing what you can to help your child's needs or meet your child's needs or something like that. And I looked in the rearview mirror and I said, you're darn right.
Oh my gosh, she's going to be some big whopping something when she's got the voice already.
She does.
Words were probably not cool, but oh my Lordy, to hear that.
Oh my gosh, she is so sassy.
I mean, it's just so funny though that they pick up on these nuances that are like, hey, other families are doing this, they get their needs met. I can't tell you how many times when my kids were younger, we would say, that's not us. This is who we are. That's not who we are. This is who we are. And we just kept saying it over and over. And, now I have some adult children and stuff. And it's like, well, now it's and what I'm watching them is they're starting to, again, redevelop, right, who they are. And we're having to tell them, well, honey, you have to now develop who you are.
Yeah.
Up until this time, it was really us establishing this is who we are as a family and as individuals in the family unit. But now you have to, you're on your own. You have to develop this. And it's interesting what they have chosen to take from us. What I see that they're adding to develop their own. I mean, I love it, but I think that, like you have to establish what works for you and your child and your family. And healthy is where we need to be all getting to, but how that looks can still have variety there.
Oh, my 100%. I tell people all the time when they come to me, it's not my job to tell you how to raise your child. At the end of the day, yes, I know a lot about parenting. And you're the expert in this room when it comes to your child and your family and you. So there's a lot of questions I ask about you, it's like, what do you think is the best thing to do here? I'm not going to, there are some hard, fast, things I would say, like if you're like, I think I'm going to spank them, I'd be like, let's not do that. Right? Like,
maybe think of another tool that might win-win, that might get the solution, be a better solution oriented. Yeah.
It's like, or we could try, right? So there's certain things. Yes, I absolutely have guardrails, but at the end of the day, I'm more interested in what you think and what you're naturally drawn to. And let's see if what tiny shifts or micro movements can we make to that to get you closer to where you want to be? Because if I just tell you what to do all day, then at the end of the day, you go home without me, then what are you going to do? I remember I had a supervisor when I was in graduate school, and she would just literally tell me what to say to clients all the time. She would listen to my tapes, because we had tapes back then. Remember those? She would listen to my tapes, and then she'd be like, all right, so there you could have said blah, 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 blah. And I'm writing it all down. And then I'd go into the session, and the client would say something else, and I'm like, crap, I don't know what to say now. You didn't teach me.
Because you're not empowered to use the resources that I think that we're just in the space with everything in our lives we need to feel empowered.
Yeah.
To trust our bodies, trust our minds, trust our hearts, trust what's coming, our intuition, trust our instincts. Like we have we're these mechanical features, and we're not using them. We're looking outside for permission. We're looking outside for the tools. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I see this, like on social media feeds, where one parent is asking other parents for advice on, and it's kind of like my trigger in a way, because I'm like, stop doing that. Mm-hmm. You need to learn the art of knowing your child and the art of knowing yourself. And that pairing will bring about what's best. But if you go ask, this person over here for their advice, and they give you a tool and you just go use the tool, it could cause more harm to your relationship than it could bring you together.
You totally have to siphon it through the filter. Whatever information you get, you have to siphon it through the filter, because if you don't, and I would call it like the divine filter, right? Allow that to go through there and say, like, does this feel good to me? Because a lot of the parents that come to me from the other pendulum side of the world, the more what many would call like the permissive side, is that, okay, yeah, now I'm not screaming or hitting my child, but now I'm angry all the time. I'm resentful all the time because I feel like you're running over me. And I think that's from what you're talking about, where it's like, okay, because a lot of these strategies, not that they're wrong or bad, they're not wrong or bad.
No.
And they may not be the best fit for your family. They may not be the best fit for you. So let's get clear on what works for you. And that's the huge piece about what I focus on. I start out Triggered to Transform talking about that. Like, I'm not here to tell you this is the right way to parent. I'm not here to tell you the right way. I'm here to help you find your right way so that you feel good. And so that even when you're in those triggered moments, you're going to go towards what you naturally gravitate towards, but in a more compassionate, curious way. Like there's two sides to every coin, right?
Right.
There are ways to communicate and to do things that are maybe a little bit left of center of what you'd normally do that feels a little bit better, and that improves the communication between you and your child. But if you just try to implement this whole new way of being that's nowhere even close to what you're used to,
right?
It's not a micro movement. Now you're trying to climb Mount Everest. Good luck with that.
Yeah, without the right tools to even climb Mount Everest.
You'll get there. It'll take a long time, but you'll probably get there eventually.
Well, and we've said this, parenting is challenging because you've got this person sitting in front of you, right? And you're trying to do what's best for this person. But I think what we forget is consciously, okay, if we're looking at it through that lens, your child is there to also evolve you and to grow you up. And it's not a one way, it's got to be the back and forth, the infinite loop of what you give them. They are also teaching you as well. It's the intercepting of student and teacher both ways. Yeah. And when you consciously look through that lens, you've just elevated the whole experience to another dimension.
Yeah. It's
for what each person can get out of it.
It's so true. And, especially if you walk the P.A.T.H framework, if you use the Empowered P.A.T.H framework, our children are going to kick up every single one of those. They're going to illuminate the stories in our heads. They're going to illuminate our body sensations and our feelings. They're going to illuminate the tools that we use. They're going to illuminate what needs to be healed and what needs to be honored. They're going to illuminate where we feel disempowered. So in many respects, they're the perfect teachers, right? But we just have to be able to get to a point where we realize I'm learning something about myself. I'm learning something about my child. Now, how can I empower myself to use this information to model what it is that I want to model? I always say our kids, they come into the world and before they come, we get really good at stuffing down our traumas and dramas and packing them away in tiny little boxes. And most of the world is pretty good at leaving them alone. Like if they happen to stumble into that room inside that inner room that contains our crap, like we can say or do something and they'll back out slowly, right? Yeah. They go in the room, flip on the light, start opening boxes, throwing stuff all over their room, and so it's one of those things where it's like all those tools and strategies we use to pack these boxes up neatly, they don't work anymore because our kids don't get the social view. And
they see you so differently. Like they call you out on every single They see it, they witness it. They're not even judging it. They're just calling you out on it.
They
and
are.
It's so amazing to watch it. I laugh. Like I probably shouldn't laugh, but when they call me out on stuff, I just can't help but cracking up laughing because I'm like, how do you even pay attention to that?
So
serious. So like, what is the one thing that we could leave parents with today who maybe are struggling in any sort of way? What's the one thing that maybe we could leave parents with, like a step forward?
Well, funny, the one step forward that came to mind was to download the P.A.T.H framework, because that will help you to look at each of the paths that I talked about today and implement them. But here's the thing, and this is where the one step comes in. I tell people, don't try to do all 5 paths at once. Just pick just one of them. Don't try to do all 5, because then you're going to miss something, and then you're going to beat up on yourself, and the shame spiral will begin. And
right.
So pick one thing that you can do, whether it's start noticing the stories in your head, start paying closer attention to the feelings that are coming up, or start noticing what tools you're using and ask yourself, can I replace this unhelpful tool with a more helpful tool? Start noticing when your child tap dances on those buttons, asking yourself, like, where does this come from? What is this about? And figuring out in those situations, like, I have power. Let's just assume that I have some power in this moment. What is one step I can take to take me closer to that, to help me walk in my power in the moment, right? And so the roadmap at healingstableMisery.com will give you each of those, and just pick one, because here's the thing, the end of the day, we're all on a journey. And I look at it like a relay race, right? And we're running, and our kids there, and they're, waiting for us to hand them the baton. And one day we're going to hand them that baton, and they're going to go off and they're going to run their own race, and we're going to sit in the stands and cheer, So run the best race you can. Realize it's not going to be perfect, and that's okay. Nobody's going to run a perfect race. It's not okay. The best I can hope for with my kids is that they'll get older and that they will turn to me one day and say, hey, Mom, you know what? You did a lot of things right. And you did some things that I don't necessarily want to repeat. That to me is an honor. Thank you. Because that means you were paying attention, you learned some things, and you are going to continue to elevate our legacy, our family legacy, towards a higher level of consciousness. And that is what I want.
I totally love that. Okay, before we go, you wrote a book. I want to make sure we do a little plug-in, because I had it written here from last time. So the name of your book is
My Forgotten Self, a story.
Did you forget it for a minute? You kind of stumbled.
I forgot My Forgotten Self. Yes.
I just stumbled. I'm like, she just forgot her own book. Like the title of the book is My Forgotten Self.
Oh God, I love it.
Okay, well, that was a little break from one thing to the next. Okay, so your book is called My Forgotten Self. Okay.
Yes, a story about a girl, universal message, and oh my gosh, I forgot the second part of it. What is it? You're catching me off guard. Now I'm going to blame this on you. A story about a girl.
Her treasure. I am she is the treasure, right?
Hold on.
That's so hilarious. We don't even know. I bring it up and we don't even know what we're talking about.
Hilarious. Oh my gosh. Here it is. All right.
Okay. So this is the thing that's coming to me. Okay. Is in this little exchange where we didn't know, we kind of laughed and we're just like, let me go get it. Hold on. This is prime parenting right here. You don't always have to know what you're doing, and it can look a little messy, and it's totally fine.
You can stop, you can breathe, you can go and see. I walked away, came back with a resource, with a new.
You're right here, and we had some laughs, and it was funny, and it doesn't always have to just look so perfectly pretty. So I'm gonna use our moment for the betterment of everything right now.
Thank you. Okay, it's My Forgotten Self, a story about a girl, a powerful encounter, and a universal message. There we go.
There we go. Woohoo! Okay, so we'll have all of that on the show notes because, I mean, Dr. Willis is amazing. I love talking to you every single time. You just make me think. You make me feel good. And, you know, I think that as we leave, the very important things are, if you're being triggered or if you're feeling sensations towards your kids, about yourself, judging your parenting, judging your family, these are good doorways. They're entry points to, let me get back to. You taught me a word last time, and I'm going to bring it up right now. You taught me the word harmony. I still remember that because that's really where we're getting. We want harmonious families. We want these entities of people sitting around to be harmonious. It doesn't mean that it's perfect all the time. Something might go out of tune or get off beat or whatever, but we know how to get ourselves back to, quote, making music, right? That feeling good, growing, learning, having fun together. So how that word harmony, where did that come from?
The divine. It was funny. For years, I would use the word balance. Like, let's find balance. And I'm like, I don't like that word. And I don't know why I'm not that I don't like it. It didn't seem to fit. And then one day I was at a Cirque du Soleil show, funny enough. And I'm watching this person on a beam or something, and they're balancing. And I look at them and I realize that's hard. Like, yeah. They're still, but when you really look at somebody balancing, they are putting in a lot of work. There is a lot of energy that has to go, a lot of like back and forth movements and thought. And I was like, that's what it is. Balance is a lot of work. And there's this sense of stagnation about it. Like you get there and you hold it. Whereas harmony to me is more fluid. It allows for the ebbs and the flows, the ups and the downs, right? And that's what's going to happen. What you hope for in your family is that when you have those ebbs and flows, that you can ebb and flow together, right? So it's not about maintaining this perfect balance in a certain state. Like I wouldn't want, I was talking about Big Bird the other day, and I'm like, I love Big Bird, but if Big Bird lived in my house, I'd get annoyed by him because he's always like, la, 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 la. Like, yeah, have a bad day for once.
How I've explained it to people is when something is balanced, both parts have to have equal, right? So if I'm a parent and I'm getting ready to go out for the evening, there's a certain amount of time that it's going to take for me to get ready. Like, let's say we're going to a formal affair and I have to, my hair has to look perfect and the jewels and the long dress. And, so you're going to be spending more time prepping. Well, you can't give your kid equal amount of time because this event now is something you're going to. So you might be spending more time on you, less on your child, but the harmonious part comes in what happens right after, or even what happened before that you had spent the morning with your child, less time on you. And there it's harmonious. Not everybody's always going to get equal amounts, but and I like how you said flow, because then that's the flow. It's one might get more than the other at certain times, but we're moving the movement forward.
I talk to couples about that all the time. It's like 50-50 is a myth. It's never 50-50 relationship, but certainly not in a marital relationship or a partnership. Like 50 is a myth. It's like, it's not going to be all the time everybody's giving. Now, if you find yourself where you're giving 90 and the other person's giving 10 in some area, maybe it's time to renegotiate.
Right. If it never changes, then that's the stagnation. Then you got to look at it differently.
Exactly.
Oh, I totally agree. Oh my gosh, this has been so fun. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
This is so good. I've had so much fun. I also just want to say too, I don't want Big Bird to have a bad day. I was joking when I said it's just sitting with me. I'm like, oh, I don't want Big Bird to have a bad day. I just, once in a while, I got to have a little Oscar the Grouch in my life. That's all. He's cool too.
That we just want the diversity, the variety. We want the multidimensional. We just want the abundant piece to come in, a little bit of everything.
Like I have a Big Bird and I have an Oscar the Grouch and I have a Grover and I have a monster. Like all those parts inside of me. So it's
oh my gosh, I haven't watched Sesame Street in so long. That is hilarious. Well, this has been wonderful. So again, thank you so much. And we'll have all of your information on the show notes for our listeners so that they can get in touch with you, follow your work, download the Empowered Pathways stuff so that they can find tools and get some inner peace and find that harmony within their families, because that's honestly where magic happens. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask you our high five questions really fast.
Ooh.
So what inspires you?
What inspires me? I mean, this might sound cliche. My kids, they do. They just how free they are. They're not pinned down at all at this point by what society says should be. They explore their gifts, with wild abandon. I mean, it's
so important.
Mm-hmm.
How do you have fun?
Mm-hmm. At this point, I would say travel, but now it's like, honestly, a lot of times now I like to go out and walk in my yard. We live in a very wooded area, or I like to sit down with my husband and watch a series, like some sort of a series on Netflix, like watching something. That's always fun for us.
How cute. One thing you can't live without.
I might have said this last time, but laughter.
Oh yeah.
That's just what comes up. I have to laugh multiple times a day.
Yes.
Have to. And if I don't, I know it because it's like 8:00 at night and I'm like watching The Office or like something that just will make me, my body needs it. My soul needs it.
Oh, I love that. What does freedom mean to you?
Freedom. Oh, that's a good one. Freedom means, I think it's just like the ability to be me, whatever that means. And whatever, if I'm Oscar the Grouch one moment or Big Bird the next, then that's okay. It's just the ability to be who I am and who I need to be in that moment to get through that moment.
Awesome.
Without judgment or shame.
Yeah. What are you grateful for?
This conversation.
I am so grateful. I think it's just wonderful to be able to have these conversations, to have the resources, because we talked a lot about that this time. Having the resources to have honest, real conversations and be able to own who we are at all moments, which is, our strengths, our weaknesses, our failures, our successes, and know there's so much potential and opportunity to continue to always evolve.
Amen, for sure.
Oh my gosh. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you again. I love you. This has been such an amazing conversation.
Yay, so glad we did well. Let's see. Okay, this time I'm going to hope that it goes well.
I think it will, because I'm listening, I'm watching the tone and all that nitty gritty stuff we had to pay attention to. Okay, listeners, thank you so much for listening this week. Remember who you are. You are both student and teacher. So take what you need from today's talk that we had together. Use it for your life experiences. You are a beautiful soul. Remember who you are. I love you. Peace out, my friends.